The Iranian regime knows exactly what chords it is plucking when it manipulates American public opinion. When the foreign minister tweets, Israel first means America last, you know that he has studied America's political arguments and understands the pressure points within Trump's coalition and understands, unfortunately, the deep anti-Semitism in American society that can be exploited by painting Netanyahu as some puppet master who's managed to spin Trump around his little finger to do his bidding, instead of the United States confronting what is a real threat to a homeland. But what's clear is not just propaganda during the war; it's been decades of propaganda before it. The decades of indoctrination that Israel is the greatest threat to the Middle East and is evil and satanic, etc. That means we enter this conflict with far too many people willing to give the Iranian regime the benefit of the doubt because they see it as standing up to the horrible forces of Western colonialism and oppression rather than being the fascistic, theocratic thug regime that it is.
Today, we're joined by one of the most recognizable voices explaining Israel to the world. Eylon Levy became widely known during the war as one of Israel's most effective communicators in international media, defending Israel's position in some of the toughest interviews around the world. Today, he continues that work through his podcast, Eylon the Record, where he dives into the geopolitical challenges facing Israel and the broader Middle East. Right now, the stakes could not be higher. For decades, Israel fought Iran through proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, militias across the region. But today, the conflict has moved directly to the source, Tehran. Today, we're going to talk about the war with Iran, what Israel's strategy is, and what the future of the region might look like after this conflict. Eylon, welcome back. It's great to have you with us.
Hello, good to join you. And I hope we'll be able to get through the whole podcast without a siren in the middle, which has happened in many interviews this week.
We'll see. For decades, Israel has fought Iran through proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, militias across the region. Was a direct conflict with Iran always coming?
For decades, Iran fought Israel through proxies. The Iranian regime tried to grind Israel down and hoped to ultimately destroy it through an asymmetric war. If you see the list that the White House put out of all the times Iran has attacked America, you'll see most of it is through proxies. That was a deliberate strategy to try to keep the regime at an arm's length, get others to do their dirty work for them. And the October 7th massacre exploded spectacularly in the face of the Iranian regime. And Israel began cutting Iran's proxies down to size, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and sees this now as a historic opportunity to deal with the core of the problem, to remake the Middle East in a way that removes the number one threat that is tried to hide behind those proxy forces. And so I think that once the Iranian regime kept egging its proxies to keep fighting instead of restraining them, and those proxies imploded one by one because Israel had the upper hand militarily, we were put on an irreversible dynamic towards Israel taking on bigger and bigger targets and now ultimately lopping off the head of the snake.
The killing of Iran's supreme leader was a historic moment. What was the strategic objective of that strike?
Israel has moved to decapitate the entire leadership of the Iranian axis of terror. Basically, every single leader of that Iranian axis, except for those who have asylum in Qatar, are now dead in the wake of the October 7th massacre. And the idea is to make the number two in command very scared to take the next role. Just look at all the other senior Iranian officials killed on the first day of the war. Many of them had been only a few months in the job because their predecessors were killed during the 12-day war. So Israel now is trying to put pressure on the Iranian regime to splinter from within. If you want the regime to collapse, you need the leaders to stop cooperating with it. And one way to bring about that collapse is to make people think twice before taking any leadership position because Israel has its warplanes in the sky. I think it's no coincidence that we haven't seen the new Ayatollah Khamenei II in public yet, whether the rumors are true that he was seriously injured or not, because he knows that Israel has put a target on his back and has put him in the crosshairs. So Israel is sending a very clear message. And it's the same message that Pete Hegseth sent about America last week, the Secretary of War said, if you threaten Americans, if you kill Americans, we will hunt you down and we will kill you. And that is the Israeli message as well. The era of impunity, of hiding behind proxy armies, is over.
Now, at this point in the war, what do you think are the biggest threats that Iran can still pose to Israel?
The biggest threat from the Iranian regime is its ability to attack on the Eighth Front, namely attacks on Jews and Israelis around the diaspora. Last week, Israel put out perhaps its most severe travel warning ever, telling Israelis to stay away from synagogues and Chabad houses anywhere on earth. I don't know the intelligence that that was based on, so I can't say if that was an exaggeration, overreaction. The fact is, the Iranian regime has sleeper cells all over the world. The British government says Iran was responsible for 20 potentially deadly attacks on British soil in the last year alone. We've seen the Iranian regime attack and blow up the Jewish community center in Argentina and the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires as well in the 90s. And we have good reason to think that the Iranian regime will try to retaliate by hitting our soft underbelly, the least protected sites, namely those that are not protected by the Israeli military. The Iranian regime has always fought dirty and it's fought asymmetrically. And there's no reason to think that it will stop doing that. Conventionally, the threat that it can pose Israel is diminishing with every day. The US-Israeli coalition has destroyed maybe 3/4 of Iran's ballistic missile launchers. It's going after the missile silos and the underground manufacturing sites as well. Just yesterday, it announced that it took out the IRGC Air Force as well. So Iran's ability to keep shooting rockets has declined precipitously. Its ability to fire drones as well, and its ability to project conventional power beyond its borders has eroded almost entirely. Hezbollah is firing nonstop at Israel, but we had a missile fired at Tel Aviv today, but not the kind of firepower it used to be able to do. And that means that the Iranian regime is going to play increasingly dirty. And unfortunately, I think that attacks on Jewish sites around the world may well be one of those dirty tricks up the Iranian regime's sleeve.
Next question was going to be about Hezbollah. How closely do you think they are coordinated with Tehran right now? Or do you think they're operating on their own?
I don't think Hezbollah is coordinating closely with Tehran because I don't think Tehran is coordinating closely with itself right now. Israel has shattered the Iranian regime's command structure by taking out the leaders of all the major forces. So it's not clear to what extent the Iranian regime itself is coordinating with itself. In fact, the Iranian regime activated what it called mosaic defense, which sounds like something out of the Torah. It's not. It means dividing the Iranian army into dozens of smaller armies, each operating autonomously. So you end up with a bizarre situation where President Pezeshkian apologizes to Arab states for attacking them and promises he won't attack them if their territory isn't used to attack Iran, and the IRGC attacking him because it's clear that the leadership itself is not coordinated. But Hezbollah now has its back against the wall. The Lebanese are under very serious pressure to dismantle that proxy army. And it looks, in as much as a layman can tell, that Hezbollah really is on its own.
Now, did it surprise you that the regime lashed out at 12, 13 different countries, many of which are Arab countries or are partners with Iran?
The Iranian regime had threatened to lash out at the whole Arab world if Israel and the US attacked. I'm not sure I thought they would be so foolish to do so. This has been a strategic, colossal miscalculation. The Iranian regime thought that if it bombed the UAE, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, the whole Gulf, those countries would go to the United States and pressure it to back off and give them some breathing space. I think the opposite has happened. It has strengthened their resolve that the Iranian ballistic missile threat has to be dealt with once and for all, and that they cannot live next to such an aggressive neighbor that will target their oil facilities, desalination plants, hotels, malls with such impunity. But that wouldn't be the first massive strategic miscalculation by Iran. The whole strategy of the Ring of Fire has backfired spectacularly in Iran's face. Surrounded Israel with a network of proxy armies to try to keep it down and divide it from its Arab neighbors. But what we've seen in recent years is Israel and the Arab world growing closer and closer to the point that Arab armies shot down missiles that were heading towards Israel last year. And now Israel is blowing up the ballistic missile launchers that are targeting Arab countries. It has brought them closer in ways they'd never been before. And it's thanks to Iran.
Now, the war is already affecting global energy markets. Oil prices are going through the roof. Do you think that the economic pressures will bring this war to an end prematurely?
That is definitely what the Iranians are hoping, that the rising global energy prices will, again, put pressure on Trump to back off, but he doesn't seem to be going there. In fact, he posted on Truth Social just now that a temporary bump in oil prices is a price that's well worth paying if it means the elimination of the Iranian threat. And for what it's worth, Israel and the United States are acting extremely quickly. They've targeted thousands of targets inside Iran. Israeli pilots are doing 3 or 4 bombing raids every day and taking energy pills to help keep them awake. They're acting as fast as they can. The Iranian regime's ability to lash out has been severely impaired, and the United States is sinking the Iranian Navy, which means even without the French ship that may or may not be on its way, I don't think the Islamic regime can close the Strait of Hormuz for that much longer. And of course, it can also not continue attacking the various oil facilities because Israel and the US have been so successfully demolishing its ability to wage war.
Now, do you think that this conflict could draw other regional powers into the war? Now, we know that China and Russia have been backing the Islamic Republic, but they're nowhere to be seen. What are your thoughts on that?
China, Russia, Iran are part of the same global axis, together with North Korea and I would add South Africa, perhaps, that are trying to challenge the Western led order. And you have to understand the threat from Iran in the context of the broader global struggle against Russia and China. Iran importing Chinese weapons, exporting weapons to Russia, it's all connected. But it doesn't look like any of these countries are going to intervene to try to protect their Iranian client because it is so comprehensively on the floor. The regime is in a really pathetic state now where it is unable to defend itself and is therefore losing any sort of potential as an ally. Where I do see a possibility for an expansion is the other countries that are being attacked by Iran getting dragged into the fighting. I imagine it must be pretty embarrassing for the Saudis that every day that goes by, it is the Yahud who are protecting the skies of Saudi Arabia by bombing up Iran's ballistic missile launchers. And I wonder how much longer we can go with the whole Arab world getting hit by Iran and letting America and Israel do their dirty work for them. At some point, they may wish to join the fight as well in order to show that they are standing up for their own national sovereignty and honor.
How effective do you think the Iranian Islamic Republic propaganda is shaping global opinion?
The Iranian regime knows exactly what chords it is plucking when it manipulates American public opinion. And you can see that the Iranian regime is singing from the same hymn sheet as the American far left and American far right. When the foreign minister tweets, Israel first means America last, you know that he has studied America's political arguments and understands the pressure points within Trump's coalition and understands, unfortunately, the deep anti-Semitism in American society that can be exploited by painting Netanyahu as some puppet master who's managed to spin Trump around his little finger to do his bidding, instead of the United States confronting what is a real threat to a homeland. So that is a very effective way of manipulating American public opinion. And beyond that, I think it's only when the fog of war clears that we will understand how much of the bots and the AI fakes online have been from Iran. But what's clear is that what has been consequential is not just propaganda during the war, it's been decades of propaganda before it. The alliance between radical Islamists and the far left, the Red-Green alliance, the decades of indoctrination that Israel is the greatest threat to the Middle East and is evil and satanic, etc. That means we enter this conflict with far too many people willing to give the Iranian regime the benefit of the doubt because they see it as standing up to the horrible forces of Western colonialism and oppression rather than being the fascistic, theocratic thug regime that it is.
Now, you spend a lot of time defending Israel in the media. Why do you think it is that Israel struggles so much to win the narrative internationally?
Sometimes when you look at the media coverage, you think there's no possible way we can win with how journalists spin it against us. I'll give you an example. Today, CNN ran a story about how Israeli and US strikes are dangerously close to civilian sites, which sounds like a damning condemnation. Why are you dropping bombs that are dangerously close to civilians? Of course, that's just a very negative way to say Israeli US strikes are conducted with such immense precision that they avoided harm to civilians. What you're reporting is an extraordinary development in warfare that Israel and the US are able to precisely target the Iranian regime and not hurt the civilians who are literally next door. So there are some journalists who just don't want to give Israel the benefit of the doubt at all. And that is a very serious, that the war is conducted against a backdrop of years of indoctrination where people are convinced that Israel is an aggressor and just wants more land and is bloodthirsty and enjoys killing children. Then you end up with the worst myths that just get amplified and amplified and amplified. I mean, take the example of the really tragic incident with the bombing of the girls' school in Minab. Now, we have to be honest, we don't know what happened there. We don't even know how many people were killed because the only information is coming out from the regime and it's not matching up with what independent investigators are saying. But the best hypothesis at the moment for what happened is that the United States accidentally hit the school because it was located next to an IRGC base and, in fact, on land that used to be part of the IRGC base. I think that's a convincing explanation, although it will have to be investigated. But that doesn't stop even British MPs putting out the story. And by the way, Gavin Newsom as well, hinting that it may have been not taking responsibility, trying to throw Israel under the bus, saying that this is Israel and it's because Israel enjoys killing children. Unfortunately, many, many years, decades, I would say centuries of ingrained prejudices mean that sometimes Israel does not get a fair fight and doesn't get a fair hearing.
Now, one of those people making accusations about Israel is Tucker Carlson. And Tucker Carlson recently visited Israel for a few hours and had a very contentious debate with Ambassador Mike Huckabee. What was your reaction to his visit and to that conversation?
I'll be honest, I couldn't force myself to listen to more than 10 minutes of Mike Huckabee's conversation with Tucker Carlson. I switched off after after Tucker Carlson said, and everyone knows Israel is the most violent country in the world. I mean, is there any other country where more people hold guns and have shot people? I don't know. Maybe it's true. Who knows? I'm just asking questions. And you realize that this is just a profoundly deceitful and dishonest tirade by a man who is motivated by an absolutely pathological, obsessive hatred. Tucker is not a good faith actor. He's a virulent anti-Semite, and he's trying to get us killed. If we want to confront the nature of modern anti-Semitism, we have to understand that some of the most popular media commentators in the United States are actively trying to get Jews killed. That is what happens when you tell millions of people that Chabad was behind the strikes on Iran, and when Candace Owens, who is also a complete psychopath nutcase, says that Israel was behind 9/11. They are trying to get Jews killed, and they are not good faith actors.
One of the arguments he made was that Christians are persecuted in Israel when the opposite is the case. Is he trying to turn Christians against Israel? I mean, what is his goal over here?
Yes, Tucker Carlson is a virulent anti-Semite who wants to destroy Israel and wants to destroy Israel by cutting it off from the United States. You cut it off from the United States when you undermine its support among mainstream evangelicals. Tucker Carlson is not only waging a war against Israel, he's waging a war against the mainstream evangelical community in the United States, trying to create a broader cultural movement, a radical cultural movement that destroys that cultural fabric and therefore the connection with Israel. He is trying to undermine Israel by convincing Christians that Israel is not on their side and is not their ally. And it's extremely dangerous. It's extremely duplicitous as well.
Do you think that he's being successful? Meaning, are we seeing a shift inside parts of the American conservative movement when it comes to Israel?
The woke right definitely seems to be ascendant right now. I mean, I did a podcast on this subject with Karis Rea, who's one of the best analysts on the topic of the woke right, and it's a movement that definitely feels ascendant. The right is undergoing a form of contagion and radicalization that happen on the left only at warp speed because all of this is happening on the internet. It's definitely dominant among the youth and among a whole generation of angry, disaffected young men who are finding answers when someone gives them a scapegoat and someone else to blame for their own country's problems. So the problem of the Tucker wing definitely seems ascendant. And you see in the way that J.D. Vance, the vice president, isn't condemning it, isn't coming out against it, is still trying to cultivate that constituency. Even as Tucker falls out with the president, JD seems to still try to have this flank of the party on his side. It's very dangerous, not as much for Israel as it is for American Jewry.
Now, one of Tucker's arguments is that the Iran war is essentially Israel's war and not America's war. And like we mentioned, that Bibi has pulled in Trump into this. How do you respond to that argument?
That the Iranian regime has been openly pursuing death to America for the last 50 years. That the Iranian regime backed the proxy terrorist forces in the region that have been behind hundreds of deadly attacks against American servicemen and women in the region. The Iranian regime calls Israel Little Satan. It calls America the Great Satan, and has absolutely not hidden its absolute hatred and animosity for the United States. Anyone who thinks that the Iranian regime is Israel's problem alone has not been paying attention to the way the Iranian regime has been targeting the United States. For goodness sake, they just tried to assassinate President Trump, and one of their senior ayatollahs just put a fatwa on the president's head. So if fighting a regime that is openly calling for the murder of your president is not a patriotic cause, I don't know what is.
Now, is regime change in Iran something that Israeli strategists even think about, or is that something that's out of their control?
Regime change in Iran is explicitly the most desirable goal of this war. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been very clear. The Iranian people must rise up at the right time to claim their future and throw off this tyranny. Everyone understands that there will be no peace in the Middle East as long as the great civilization of Iran is governed by a terrorist regime that is committed to death to everyone. So what Israel hopes is to create the conditions where the Iranian people can rise up and take their freedom. Now, they've tried before. They've bravely risen up against the regime and they were slaughtered in the streets. So Israel is now bombing the Basij, bombing the Revolutionary Guards from the air and crushing those instruments of regime oppression so that the people will have a fair shot. And let's wait and see in the coming days to see what happens to Mojtaba Khamenei. I mean, he might be dead by the time this episode comes out, because I think if Israel keeps mowing down Iran's top leadership, because we have total intelligence penetration of Iran and control the skies of Tehran, you may well see cracks within the regime and people willing to defect. And that's what President Trump is calling for. He's saying, surrender, defect to the United States, defect to the people, defect to building a free Iran. And then we can talk business.
Now, critics would say that, it's almost impossible to have a regime change without boots on the ground, or if you want to arm the people that are on the ground. Do you think that's a possibility?
Again, Israel and the United States are not talking about going in and installing a leader. They're talking about giving the Iranian people a fair chance to overthrow the regime like they have tried so many times before. And Iran is not Iraq or Afghanistan. It's not a fake country. It is a country with millennia of national and civilizational identity, an educated middle class, limited experience of electoral politics, a wealthy diaspora who will want to support and invest. Iran has the best chances of any country in the Middle East of becoming a stable and prosperous democracy. And the Iranian people have tried so many times before to cast off the regime. And they failed because the regime had a monopoly on violence. That's how thousands of them were slaughtered in the streets just a few months ago. And Israel hopes remove the regime's monopoly on violence, have the leaders second guessing because they're constantly thinking about survival and not strategy. And you give the Iranian people a real shot to do what they've been trying to do for years, and that's to change the regime themselves.
You are in Tel Aviv right now. What is the morale of the people there? I know there have been multiple sirens daily, but Can you tell us what it feels like to be on the ground over there?
Morale is very high because people are determined to finish the job. We have been at war with the Iranian Axis for over 2 years since the October 7th massacre. And the feeling is enough is enough. This ends here. The children who are running into the bomb shelters several times a day, we do not want to leave the problem of Hezbollah or Iran for them to deal with when they are over. This is a historic opportunity now that the tables have turned for Israel to remove the threats of aggression against it. So people are tired. There are sirens throughout the night. People are anxious. Some of the missiles are getting through. They're causing damage to property and they've killed people as well. People are nervous. They don't want to be out on the streets, although cafes, restaurants are open and people are trying to stick to normal life as much as they can. But there's an understanding we're just going to have to stick with it because if we don't, then the Iranian regime will come back with a vengeance. If we do nothing, the Iranian regime builds a nuclear bomb. If we do nothing, the Iranian regime achieves immunity with ballistic missiles. If we do nothing, the Iranian regime rebuilds the ring of fire against us. So doing nothing is not an option. We'll run down to the shelters and we'll suck it up.
Eylon, thank you very much for your time. I truly appreciate it. And I hope that the next time we speak, we'll speak about how successful this war was and about the new Iran that will give freedom to its people. So
Looking
thank you.
forward to visiting. Thank you.
Take care. If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this. You can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.